Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined-up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters, and key figures from the publishing industry, plus loads of hints, tips, and inspiration for all kinds of creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review, or just tell a friend. Right, cue that cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Yes, hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination goes a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 120 with Rod Duncan. Rod is a multi-genre writer from contemporary crime to fantasy and his amazing steampunk alternate history series set in the gaslit empire. So get ready to be inspired because Rod's full of insight and knowledge, and it was great to catch up with him again. Before we slide into the interview, the usual quick update from me. I've been taking stock and building up my mental defences, ready to start another round of submissions for my crime novel, Safe Hands. I've been compiling another list of agents and publishers and casting another quick eye over the manuscript to package it with my next batch of query emails. And to be honest, it really is an act of will, a sort of deliberate attempt to throw off the self-doubt and get it back out into the world again. I travelled to London this week to interview author and actor Jonathan Digby for an upcoming episode, and I was inspired to try once again to get my shit together. It's a massive part of why I do these interviews, because it feeds my own creative passion, it provides an often welcome injection of motivation and inspiration, and I genuinely hope it has the same effect on at least some of you out there listening to this. So why the self-doubt for me at the minute? Well, in relation to the novel, I guess it's the realisation that it doesn't quite conform to the usual genre conventions of what on the face of it I think would be called a caper novel or one last job sort of Brit crime story in the vein of films like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels or The Long Good Friday. Because the premise or the log line is Mickey Blake, an ageing safecracker who can open any vault with only a heightened sense of touch, must take on one more job for the sake of his dying wife and a son that hates his guts. But what it's really about is fathers, sons, toxic masculinity and the regrets of an ageing criminal who basically is on the verge of an emotional collapse. I mean, yes, it's got lots of the elements you'd expect in a gritty crime novel, some violence, some black humour and a bit of action, but there's this kind of emotional heart to it, and I've been wondering whether agents or prospective readers will be prepared to take the chance and go on that journey. But then on reflection, I can think of loads of examples in music, books and film where the creatives behind them, they haven't worried about any of that stuff. They've told their story in the way they want to tell it, and they've given their audience something they didn't even realise they wanted. So I think that's what we've all got to do. Tell your story in the way you want to tell it, because your unique voice is what will, ultimately, help you find the readers who aren't just casual fans, but real, dedicated fanatics that can't wait to hear what you've got to say next. So that's my hope anyway. I've set myself a target for how many more submissions I'll make, after which I'll be pushing ahead with going the indie publishing route and letting readers decide for themselves if they want to find out what happens to Mickey Blake. But what about you? What are you doing to combat self-doubt and creative uncertainty? Because I want to hear your stories. Just go on, vent, get it out there, and we can all learn together. So get in touch by tweeting me at JUPodcast or emailing wayne@waynekellywrites.com, as I'd love to hear from you. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk to get free stuff and be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Right, I feel better for getting that all off my chest. So let's get to the real reason you tuned in, which is today's interview with Rod Duncan. So Rod writes alternate history, fantasy and contemporary crime. His novels have been shortlisted for the Philip K. Dick Award, the East Midlands Book Award and the CWA's John Creasey Dagger. A dyslexic with a background in scientific research, he now lectures in creative writing at DeMontfort University. His new book, The Fugitive and the Vanishing Man, is the 6th in his steampunk flavoured Gaslit Empire series of books, and it's out right now. So enjoy the interview and stick around to the end of the show if you can, because I want to ask you about another important decision I've got to make about the podcast. Okay, Rod, thanks a million for joining me on Joined Up Writing. I really appreciate it. So why don't we start off just by telling people where you're speaking from and how things are going?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking me. It's great to be talking to you again. Yeah, I'm sitting here at home in Glenfield, which is just outside Leicester, and so not so far as some of your calls, I know.
No.
And yeah, so here I am, and yeah, so Leicester was the kind of nucleus for this. I don't know quite how to describe it. This rather weird set of alternate history stories that I started writing, oh my goodness, must be about 8 years ago. And the 6th book has just landed basically a few weeks ago. So it's a kind of amazing journey and all nucleated around Leicester.
It's amazing. So tell us what that 6th and most recent book is.
So the book just out is called The Fugitive and the Vanishing Man. And I'm holding a copy of it here. I'll just riffle it in front of the microphone for you.
That's it. Paint a picture.
Good radio. And yeah, so The Fugitive and the Vanishing Man. And you could look at it as book 6 in the alternate history, but it's also the third in a trilogy, because they're kind of two trilogies. So that it completes the trilogy of The Map of Unknown Things.
Excellent. And it's the Gaslit Empire series of books, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what people kind of call them. The first trilogy was called The Fall of the Gaslit Empire, and it didn't quite fall by the end of the 3 books. But we're kind of working towards that epic conflagration right now. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think when we originally spoke, I think we kind of worked out it was about 5 years ago now. But when you were speaking then, I think you were kind of hinting, you'd already at that point started, I think you'd got in your mind that you were thinking it might go to 4. I think you were thinking it was going to be like a quadrology. But obviously since then, the ideas have continued to flow. So just for people that don't know, that are completely new to the series, just give us a sense of what the series is about and tell us a little bit about your main character, Elizabeth Barnabas.
Okay, so the whole thing, to understand the setting, you go back 200 years to the early years of the 19th century, and something happens in 1815 which pushes the course of European history and then world history off in a different direction. I won't tell you what it is, because that's kind of something you'll discover.
Spoiler alert, yeah.
Yeah. If you read the books, you'll discover that. But what happens is, after a number of years from this event, there is a Luddite-inspired revolution in Britain, and the result is a revolutionary war, and the country is split in two, with a republic to the north and a kingdom to the south, and the border running right through Leicester, which is why the story is kind of nucleated here. And so that's the setting. And but the character Elizabeth, yeah, I think she's the reason the whole thing kept going, because people kind of, for some reason, I don't know, formed an attachment to her. People, write to me from all over the world and tell me how much they love Elizabeth and what she does, which is kind of amazing and humbling. And Elizabeth is a go-it-alone sort of person. She's lost her family, and she's living a solitary life working as a private investigator, basically. But in order to do that in this rather socially buttoned up and regressive society that she finds herself in, she needs to pass herself as a man in order to do much of the private detective work that she does. And so people may believe that there's Elizabeth and her brother, but actually there is just Elizabeth. But whilst she is doing these private investigation jobs, trying to earn a crust, trying to earn a bit of money, she kind of stumbles across stories that start to get her involved in understanding the actual origin of this order, the Gaslit Empire. and get us progressively pulled further and further into the world of big politics and the geopolitical changes that are happening.
And give us a sense of like this world, because you've kind of alluded to it a little bit. You talked about the Luddite kind of revolutionaries and all that kind of thing, but essentially there's kind of aspects of I know you didn't necessarily agree with this when you first started writing it, but sort of there's steampunk elements to it, aren't there, in terms of the technology and the setting in the world?
That's right. It's kind of anachronous. So what you get is this international order has held back the progress of science and technology, and so we have a world that feels very much like the sort of 1890s to the early, to 1905, sometime around that, in technology and style and sort of social progress. But actually, time has progressed far more than that. Things have been artificially held back. So it has that anachronous, Victorian-esque feeling about it, which I'm very happy that, people who like steampunk have really gravitated towards it and really embraced it. I'm perfectly happy with that description, but I think I don't feel that I can kind of pitch it as absolutely mainstream steampunk, because there are elements of it and threads of it that don't really quite fit so well, and I wouldn't want to kind of disappoint someone who
fans.
yeah, that's right. Someone who really is immersed in that steampunk world might find it a little not quite as strongly steampunk as they might want if we kind of labelled it way.
I know what you're saying. So where did the original jumping off point come for this for you? Just give us a sense of that. Do you remember, was there like a lightning bolt, or was it something that sort of built up over a period of time?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I kind of look back now and try to figure that out. I think, having lived in Leicester for quite a number of years, and I had this developing sense of that the built environment being the work of those Victorian architects. Mm-hmm. And it's those little things. I think I probably said this last time we chatted. If the road surface breaks up somewhere a little bit in the winter frost, and you can see cobblestones underneath, and it's like that everywhere. It's just that thin veneer of the modern world on top of what the Victorians built. And so I kind of had a yearning to create a story that would bring that world back and make it sort of reimagine it in the present day. And because of that, I thought, okay, well, I'll write some short stories. I'll write an alternate history in which the world still looks Victorian-esque now in the present day. And so I figured out what the alternate history was and how it would work. And then I started to write this little short story just to experiment. And that kind of grew and became the first novel. And as you say, then there was a trilogy, and then it was bit by bit we were kind of moving forwards. Actually, quite early on, I had an idea for the entire arc of stories right up to the end. But with the way books are sort of bought and sold, and contracts and all those things, you take one bite at a time, really. And so first it was 2 books, and then there were 3, and then there were 6, and that's where we are now.
And it's still going. Well, that's obviously, is it gives you a great sense of how successful they've been. You wouldn't keep being given the opportunity to keep putting them out there like that. And presumably you enjoy writing them as well. What are the pros and cons of writing a series? I mean, are you tempted, or maybe you are already writing other stuff, but are you tempted to write other stories or other genres? How do you sort of stay focused to the world that you're currently writing in?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, and I think that one way that you stay focused is that a deadline's heading towards you like an express train, and that kind of sharpens the mind. And I always do think, when I talk to people who are they're writers, but they've not yet contracted to write novels, and they're writing speculatively. It is actually a very rich time, that time before you get your first contract, because once that happens, you then have one job, which is to write the next novel. Whereas before that, you can just try your hand at anything, and there is a joy to that as well. Although both sides of it have something positive. So how to keep on track. So let's just go back to that question, the first one you asked about writing a series, the pros and cons of writing a series. In a way, writing a series, there's something easy about it. The world is already established. You've done a lot of the world building. You know it as the writer, and you've got readers out there who also know it. So that's all good. But on the other hand, what you're hoping is that the next novel gets new readers. And so you really want to write each novel in a way that it can be approached by someone who's not read the previous thing. And that, at first, with novel number 1, you don't have that problem. Novel number 2, that problem is there, but it's not too great. Novel number 3, it's a bit bigger. By the time you're up at number 6, it's really quite a profound problem and quite a big question, how you satisfy both those audiences, the new audience and the faithful audience who's been with you from the start. And in a way, that's partly why there are 2 trilogies, which do stand alone. And people tell me, oh, it's much better if you read them from the very beginning, from book 1 in the entire series. But nevertheless, you can easily jump on at the first book in the second trilogy and just read that as a standalone sort of trilogy, if you wish. So that's partly the reason why it's arranged in that way. But it is difficult, and the difficulty compounds. Now, if you let's suppose you have sales that are massive, TV series are made of it and Netflix buy it and it's all over the place. In that situation, you don't have the same problem because the bookshops will stock all the books. And so people will see that shelf space and they'll start at book 1 and they'll work their way through. But if you've not got that kind of really A-list success, then it's unlikely by the time you've got to book 6 that many bookshops are going to be stocking the entire backlist. And it's it puts people off from picking up a book if they see it's number 4 in a series.
It's peculiar to books in a way, and as you say, because you mentioned sort of Netflix or a TV thing, and people, and obviously usually it is all there if they go to a series, and it's not, you don't you do kind of have, sometimes you'll have a series recap at the beginning of a series if it's ongoing, and it's the next season, they kind of give you a quick season recap. But it, as you say, it is peculiar to books, isn't it, in that sense that if you pick up a book, you can sort of feel not cheated, but you think, oh God, all right, this is book 4, I've just realised, and now I've got to go back and
in some ways that's actually the medium itself, that you can if we think about world building, which is a lot of the issue. If you just see 30 seconds of film of whatever it is, Game of Thrones, The Witcher, or whatever it is, through the visual medium, you're picking up a vast amount of world building that is the careful, painstaking work of set designers and costume designers and all these
picture
people.
Paints 1,000 words,
But in prose, you don't have that easy ride. So it's got to be. And I'm not saying it's easy for filmmakers. There's a massive amount of skill that goes into that work.
But it's different.
It's a different thing. It's a different thing. So I think it is harder for someone in an audience to just dive in mid-series for books, but it's doable. And I always think, this is one indication of if your story is working well, you should be able to open it up more or less anywhere and start reading as if you knew nothing about it, and it should still kind of carry you forwards. And so that's I suppose the measure that I always try to have. It's not even that you have to start at the beginning of a book, but you could start, if you just opened it at random, would it captivate you? Would it carry you forwards?
Draw you in,
Yeah, that's the kind of standard you kind of go for. But having done 6 books and got to that sort of endpoint, it's not. I mean, it's not completely ended. There is more to tell.
Yeah.
There is. But I just need a break from it.
Is that the plan?
Yeah. So I'm writing something completely different at the moment, just to have the experience, the freshness, of just having a completely new world to develop and new characters, and I'm really enjoying it. It's so good. I often think when I'm talking to creative writing students or people I'm mentoring or whatever, and sometimes I see this thing where people have been working on the same book for maybe 3, 4, 5 years, and at that point, whereas I don't want anyone to be sort of flaky and just sort of hop around and never finish anything, but if you've got that very long period with something, it is really it can be incredibly refreshing just to put it away, start something completely new and unrelated, and at that point you usually see the people leap forwards in their ability, and I think you've done masses of learning during that writing process over those years, but you're still anchored to the level you were at the beginning, because the way it's set up is kind of keeping you at that level. And as soon as you start something new, you cash in all that learning and you leap forwards.
I completely agree. Yeah.
So I do think it's for me to be writing something new now, it's fun and refreshing and all that sort of stuff. So I'm pleased to be doing what I'm doing.
So before you started the Gaslit Empire series of books, were you published before that? What and if so, or what were you writing before that? Was it the same sort of genre, or was it completely different?
No, I'm a bit of a genre hopper. So my first published novels were contemporary crime. So they were published by Simon & Schuster back in. First one came out 2003. And so I've got a trilogy of Leicester-based contemporary crime novels. And after that, I kind of wrote some more stuff, and I didn't manage to get it published. And I thought, I'm never going to write a novel again. That's it. I'm giving up. This is hopeless. Mark Twain wrote that giving up smoking is easy. He knew, because he'd done it hundreds of times. Yeah. and I kind of think that's kind of thing. Anyway, at that time, I was absolutely convinced I'm never writing another novel. And so I thought I want to write screenplays and have a go at that. So I realized I didn't understand the way that filmmakers talked about film. So I thought I had to have a go at making film. So I signed up for a kind of short course in filmmaking, and we made a short movie at the end of it. And through that, I kind of started to get involved in indie filmmaking and that whole area. And I have to say, I have learned so much of storycraft through working with film, partly just by working in a different medium, and partly because I suppose I can write in prose, any sentence I want, but when you actually try to film it, it costs money, and so it absolutely forces you to think about every scene, and not to you never want to waste a line, because in filmmaking it costs. That's another day filming.
Absolutely.
So it trains you to strip everything back, and so I did that for a while, and I still sort of dabble in that world now and again. I'm very happy to do so, and and then as I say, the novel got me. It's like some disease, you can never get rid of it.
Well, it's the way that you sort of con yourself into it. I find it's like the way you mentioned when you first started writing this series of books was you kind of thought, well, this is just a short story, and but you probably knew really deep down there was probably a little voice that was saying this is going to be a novel. You probably did know somewhere, but you're in denial about it, because I've done the same sort of thing myself. You start
deep
off and
denial.
Yeah. And I think it takes the pressure off. I think it's actually quite a good technique when you first start writing it, because I do think if you sit down and you say, now I'm writing a novel, there's quite a lot of pressure that comes with that, just thinking about it like that, the enormity of the task and what's kind of ahead of you. Whereas, I'm just going to do this little thing for fun and just sort of see where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I think this series now is more than 500,000 words, and I
Wow.
kind of think, wow, how did that happen? If I'd known. And you said it earlier on, talking about enjoying it. Yeah, I mean, but I don't think enjoy is quite the right word, because it's a profound process. And on the one hand, one feels driven to do it, and you know, heaven knows if there was some other thing that I could do, and instead it would be easier. But because it is the hardest thing in the world, but at the same time, one of the most wonderful. And each novel puts up a fight. You have to learn how to beat each novel you write. I think
to wrestle it to the ground. Yeah,
absolutely. Each one is different. Each one has its own tricks, and you have to learn the whole thing afresh each time, which is its joy. But but I don't think sort of the word enjoy seems too small
Endure,
a word
maybe.
for the process. Yes, immerse yourself, I think.
So what you mentioned, that process, have you kind of got a set process or a set way of doing things or thinking about things when you sit down to write a new book?
Well, like I say, I do think each novel is going to resist you in its own way, and you just have to write it to find out what the fight is that it's going to put up, and work out how to deal with that. On the other hand, I've written quite a number now. When I add up all the published and all the unpublished novels, it's quite a lot. So you you get an instinct for it, a sense of the rhythm of storytelling that's needed for a novel. And I suppose I tend to think that if I can find the voice of a piece of writing, then the story will start to tell itself. And sometimes that's a struggle. Sometimes you can't figure out what the narrator's going to, what the narrator's going to sound like, what their relationship is to the audience, and all those little things, however you conceive it. But I think once I've got a sense of who's telling the story, whether that's a third person narrator or a first person or whatever it is, and who they're telling it to, I kind of try and fix that in my mind as well. Not that it turns up in the book. You can't see it in the book.
No, but it gives you kind of a focus.
Yeah. So like with Elizabeth, with the Gaslit Empire, I always imagine she's telling someone this stuff a few years after the whole thing's happened. And so the people she's telling, they know a lot of the history and a lot of the setup, but not all of it. And so occasionally she just throws in a little extra helpful detail. The helpful narrator, I call it, this sense of, you might not know that, so I'm just going to fill in that.
That's a great way of thinking about it, though, to get the tone right.
Yeah, and so then knowing who she is and who's listening to her, then I can the narrative stance, the narrative tone, the voice of it all kind of sorts itself out then and remains consistent. That's the point, because you can do any of these different voices, but if you chop around, then people will not like it. So there's that as the voice, and then as I write, there'll be some sense at some point of what the crucial question is, what the inciting incident is. The major plot beats, which I might spot quite early on. I'll get a sense of, if I sometimes think in terms of act structure, I'll get a sense of what's the Act 1 climax and so on, and what the event will be that'll push us into the final section of the book. But I don't know what's between those main beats, but I fix my gaze on those main points, the main turning points, I suppose, the places where the story moves forward in a way that it can never go back again.
It sounds like
irreversible.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're thinking about it in much the same way as you would structure a screenplay to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think with screenplays, certainly the major budget movies tend to follow a fairly restricted set of patterns, partly because such a lot of money has to go into them that no one wants to take the risk of straying very far. With indie movies, lower budget movies, people can take more risks, and you can start to play around with those structures a lot more, I think. But with novels, much more so again, partly because there is an awful lot more plot in a novel than there is in most movies, and partly, because it doesn't cost £500,000 to print a copy of the book. That's the point.
Yeah.
And so you have a lot more freedom, but nevertheless, I do think there's a lot of learning that can come out of the way people approach film, which can be useful. But it's a delicate balance. You mustn't get to the stage where you feel trapped by it, or I have to do this now. This thing has to happen next. I think the story will tell you what needs to happen next.
Sure. So do you pretty much start writing from the get-go and sort of plot as you go along and kind of make notes, or do you very much want to have a pretty tight idea of where it's going before you start writing chapter 1 or whatever?
No, I'm happy to explore. And certainly, I mean, it depends. It's quite different if you're writing in a series. If you're in a series, you probably got already a pretty good idea of where it's got to end, because that's where the next book's got to begin. So there is a master plan there. Mm-hmm. But with a book, you're just starting off fresh, a standalone. I'm happy to launch and write, but by the time I've written 10,000 words, I've probably got a pretty good idea of what the key beats are going to be. If I'd worked it all out before, not that I possibly could, because my working memory isn't sufficient to the task. I can't hold, the plot of a novel is more than a headful.
It is, for most people, yeah.
And but even if I could do it, I think that would take away the impetus from me to write it. I enjoy the discovery, and I enjoy that coming to a moment and you writing a scene, and then, wow, this thing happens, and you kind of just allow it to happen and get carried away with it, and then you finish the chapter and you review it, and there's some problems with it, but you've made a discovery, and that discovery is the joy. It is the amazing thing for you as the writer, but
absolutely,
and therefore hopefully also for the reader. And I think ultimately, coming on to quite a philosophical point from the practical, it seems to me that that sense of discovery, of understanding more about the world through the process of writing, is fundamentally at the very deepest level why a lot of us do it. That through that process we come to understand ourselves, and we come to understand the world, or aspects of the world that we're writing about.
Absolutely. Well, kind of on a similar sort of theme, what's your earliest memory of creative writing? What did you enjoy about it, or when did you realise you might have a talent for it?
Well, certainly not in school. Way back, when I was probably about 6 in school, there was this thing, a session once a week, where the teacher got us to got a volunteer to just tell a story to the class, and I loved that. Was great. I loved that, and I kept getting chosen to do it because I kind of figured out some of the structural elements of the sort of stories that we got fed, so I could kind of do it. But then they started getting us to try to write them down, and there everything went wrong. I couldn't do that at all. And if there was one lesson of my schooling that I should remember and never forget, it's that I should never have anything to do with writing, because that was awful. I love stories. Yeah, I love telling stories. I love making stories up in my head, almost obsessively, I think. I just would create stories, but I could never write them down. And so I did, just when I was just leaving school, me and a friend wrote some stuff, and he wrote it down, and we just talked the story through, and he wrote it. It never went anywhere, but it was amazingly fun. But I couldn't write it myself. No, it's the dyslexia is quite a strong barrier to stop me doing that sort of thing. So it was way later when I'd learned to type, and when the word processor had kind of developed a bit, and I found that amazingly I could write, and that's a definite moment when I just made this discovery and started doing it, and I wrote few poems, and then I wrote a short story, and I thought, okay, I'm going to write a novel, and I did. And of course, it was awful, but it was still a joyful experience, and I did it. And then I knew I had to do it again, and one thing led to another, and I was hooked.
Well, it's such a huge, as you mentioned the dyslexia there. I mean, without wanting to state the obvious, obviously that is a huge barrier, especially. I mean, obviously it's kind of better diagnosed now, and it's kind of more in the mainstream in terms of people recognise it earlier and all that kind of thing. But even so, that must have been a huge thing. There must have been a really, really strong desire to tell stories and to write, for you to be able to get past that, and not to mention a lot of hard work, I should imagine.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't, I suppose you're asking me, what is my experience different from someone else's? But I've only had
difficult.
mine.
Yeah,
so
I appreciate that.
I can't kind of say. I can tell you that I do feel compelled, and I probably always have felt compelled to tell stories. The actual writing, the getting them onto, from ideas in the head to marks on a page, that's been the problem. So I suppose I must want it pretty bad, because I've kept on doing it. But I don't look on it as a disability. I look on it as a difference.
Yeah, completely. But obviously, with how, I mean, I know from when we spoke last time, I think one of the things that you were using different tools. You mentioned typing there, and we talked a little bit about dictation, I think, last time, which I think has been quite helpful to you as well.
Yep, that's really good. I've done quite a lot of this novel I'm writing now with dictation. I tend to use the dictation, the first draft, and then go into the keyboard for editing and stuff. And I do a lot of editing. There's more editing than there is first drafting. I think through the editing process, just going round and round and round, I kind of figure out what's going on and what it's about, and what those little glints of truth, that we look for.
It's kind of where you discover what the novel really is.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I kind of think plot. Okay, we get an idea of. I suppose character comes first, and then you kind of figure out what the plot's going to be. But theme, which is kind of probably more profoundly what the novel's about, is for me the last thing I figure out. And this series of novels, the themes I kind of wasn't really even aware of as I'm writing them, but nevertheless there is a coherence to that, I think. So I just don't know where it comes from.
No, I think that's the same with everybody, as you say. I think it's just there, isn't it? I think sometimes people worry about it too much, or they worry about it early on. They think, I must know the theme before I start writing the novel. But I think it's one of those almost instinctive things. You probably do know it, but it will emerge as you write the novel, and you'll be able to look at it and go, oh, that's what I was writing about for all those thousands of words.
Yeah, yes, it's a crazy way to discover things, isn't it?
It is.
But would we do it any other way?
It's a magic. It's a strange magic trick. So I mean, as regards like the dyslexia and stuff, how does that affect? Does that affect your editing and say receiving notes from your editor and stuff? Does it make it? I suppose, as you say, you've only got this way of doing it to kind of compare it to, but. Is it more of a slog? Are there certain elements of the writing process that you find more difficult than others?
I think think every writer, has difficulties. They're just different patterns of difficulties for different people. But I think for me, probably the dyslexia has pushed me towards a kind of attempt at a sort of perfectionism. Which isn't necessarily a good thing, but it makes me edit a lot, and I don't. If I was starting out, I wouldn't advise myself to do that, but that's somehow the way it is, and then you kind of develop it, and then that becomes a strength, and it becomes something that is actually almost an engine of the process. So I don't think. I don't know. The thing I regret is I wish I could read more fluently, because then I would read a lot more stuff, and I would be a lot better versed in, the subtleties of genres, and I would have read far more of the wonderful pieces of writing that are out there, and I would be a better writer because of it. And so that's the one thing I kind of feel I regret. But the rest of it,
it's just different. Yeah.
It's just probably different. And I think I've worked on things, and I've turned the weaknesses into strengths, other than the reading thing. So yeah, I don't think, it's a stony road for everyone. I don't think it's I'm not saying, oh, look how terrible it is for me. I'm not saying that at all.
No.
You just have a pattern of strengths and weaknesses, and everyone is different. And with someone who's dyslexic, that pattern is a bit more spiky, a bit more, some things really bad and some things really good. And so it's just a strongly different pattern. But I think it's been an advantage to me. I don't think it's been beyond the point of actually being able to get words down on the page. I think it's made things probably easier. But, I think it's this thing that if I've got a student and we're trying to write something with a really arresting voice, if someone can write automatically and has complete mastery of and fluency with language, it's actually really hard to get them to transcend that.
Mm-hmm.
But if they don't have automaticity, if they have to think about writing a sentence and it takes conscious effort, it's kind of easier for them to intervene in the process and transcend the ordinary and find something a bit extra. So at the very difficulty, that lack of fluency with language, which I have,
Mm-hmm.
It can be seen as a disadvantage, but it can also, you can pitch that very same thing as an advantage. So I don't know. It's everyone's road is slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you cast your mind back to when you were very first published, so when you were doing your contemporary crime novels, were there things in that when you first became a quote unquote published author? How did you find that experience? Was it different to what you'd imagined it to be? Did you even have any preordained ideas of what it might be like to be a published author? Were there aspects of it that you weren't prepared for or that took you by surprise?
I think every novel I've written, including all the ones that were never remotely good enough to be published, I've always convinced myself that they were good enough to be published. And I've always, whilst writing, motivated myself by thinking, yeah, this is gonna happen. This time, all the other times it didn't happen, but this time it'll happen. And so I kind of, when it did happen, it was a moment of great joy, and very significantly changed, I suppose, my it was a very enabling thing. I think that's the point. But at the same time, I kind of had convinced myself it was going to happen anyway, And bear in mind, I've been through all those novels I've written that hadn't got published. That every one of them, I would told myself, this is the one, and because otherwise, how could I possibly?
It's the self-belief to do it, yeah.
It's pushing yourself forward to do it, and then each time you discover it's not going to be published, and you sort of crash down a bit, and then no, this time,
this is the one.
Build it up. This is the one. This is the one.
This is the lottery ticket.
As long as this one's a bit better than the last one, I'll get there. So, I think the huge difference was that the way other people viewed me, and that because it is a kind of weird thing. This dyslexic guy who's trying to write novels and he's never managing to do it, and they're never getting published, and of course they're not, and it's a kind of piteous story, really.
Mm-hmm.
But then, oh gosh, the dyslexic guy who's written a novel and it's got published by Simon and Schuster, and he's he's in the newspapers and all that sort of stuff. It's wow, that's a completely different story. I'm just the same person,
sure.
From the day before that letter came out.
I'm the person you didn't want yesterday, but you do want now, sort of thing.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird. It's the external. I really believe that people who have recognized in themselves the need to write need to acknowledge that we're writers, and it doesn't, that moment of external validation when other people start calling you a writer, is fine. That's important, yeah. But within ourselves, we've got to tell ourselves, yeah, I'm a writer. It's an acknowledgement of a kind of truth we've discovered, and it's I think it's an enabling thing. It enables us to take our work seriously, to consider it as something that we've got to do really well, that we've got to strive at, that we've got to continually try to do better each day, better than the day before. And so yeah, it's an internal validation and external validation. That's what I'm saying. The internal one you've got to have. If you know that you're a writer and you don't have a choice, that's what you're going to do. Then acknowledge it to yourself. You can keep it secret if you want. You don't have to tell other people, but acknowledge it to yourself, because that's the profound truth. And it doesn't mean you will get published or you will achieve, will get your movie produced or whatever external benchmark you've set yourself. But even if you don't, it's not an invalid process. The process you're going through is a profound process of discovery about the world, about yourself. It is valid, and it's it's perfectly right to say, yeah, I'm a writer, even if that's a secret that you don't tell.
Well, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's one of those questions: is how do I be a writer? Well, you write.
Yeah,
that's it,
right.
Really.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you write, then you're a writer of some of. It might not be the best writer in the world or whatever. You might not be very good at it when you first start, but you are a writer. You're writing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's a profound thing. It's I think it is anyway. And the longer I've been doing it, the more profound I think it is, and the more grateful I am really to have the opportunity to do it.
And what would you say is your favourite part of the whole process?
Oh my goodness. I'll give you, I suppose, two answers to that. There's one in the depths of the writing of the novel, where you go and you start writing for your allotted writing session, and you lose yourself in it, and you become not aware of yourself at all. And then the alarm goes, or whatever it is that tells you that you've got to stop. And you think, oh my goodness, that's only been a couple of minutes, but actually it's been an hour. And that I don't know what it is. It's just when you're so in tune with the process that you're not even present. It's just happening, as it were. That's I think that's an amazing experience anyway. And the other one is when the book's written and it's gone through all the editing and it's gone out and it's been accepted, and all those are good moments. And then you see the cover design, that's a good moment, and there's a launch or whatever, you see it in the shops, that's a good moment. But then there comes a moment when someone gets in contact with you who you've never met before and says, I've just read your book and it really meant something to me. And that's the best. Yeah. That's for me, that's when the book becomes itself. What I have done and what the publisher's done, put this thing together, that's all great, but it's still not complete. It's the reader who completes it. And when you get that news that that's happened for someone, that's just wonderful.
It's just a special moment.
Yeah.
And if you were starting out again, as we kind of move towards wrapping things up, if you were starting again tomorrow as a new writer, what, if anything, would you do differently, or what would you go back and tell your younger self?
Well, those are two different questions, aren't they? I don't think I'd do anything differently, because I'm me, and I'd make all those mistakes again.
Because that's how you learn.
Yeah. What advice would I give myself? I think it would be, this is valid. This is valid. Whether or not it gets published, this is still valid. And I think to have the assurance of that, which I carry now, which I didn't have then, that would be really great.
Fantastic. So just as we wrap things up, would just tell people where they can find out more about you online and obviously get hold of your books.
Well, you can, yes. I am actually going to be having a book launch this Sunday.
Yeah, so by the time this goes out, people will be able to get hold of that?
They can go to YouTube, go to Rod Duncan's YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see the book launch. I'm getting Siobhan Logan's going to be interviewing me, and we're going to hopefully get some questions from around the world. This latest book has a lot of it set in Oregon, and I know I've got a lot of readers out there in Oregon, so I'm hoping we're going to get some questions from there.
Oh, brilliant.
And so I mean, all the usual places. You can find me on Twitter under the my Twitter ID, Rod Duncan, surprisingly enough. And you can find, if you use Facebook, you can find the Gaslit Empire group on Facebook, where you get all the latest news. And use Google and find where the books are. They're all over the place. I'm very accessible.
That's great. I'll put all of those links in the show notes so people can find them. But for now, good luck with the new book that's just coming out, and I'll enjoy talking to you, and I'll hopefully speak to you again soon.
That's been lovely. Thanks, Wayne. It's been really interesting. Your questions are brilliant.
Well, while it was very kind of him to say that, the questions are only ever as good as the answers the guest gives, and Rod had some real insight there. So thanks again to Rod Duncan, and you definitely need to check out his Gaslit Empire series, so give it a try. Start at the beginning with The Bullet Catcher's Daughter, and marvel at the fact that you're also reading about actual places I live and work in real life. Also check out his website and Twitter, etc., and I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joineduprighting.co.uk. Before I go, remember I mentioned about having another important decision on my mind? Well, I wanted to float the idea I've had of changing the theme tune for the show. You bounder! You cheat! Shock horror. Well, over the years I've had comments good and bad about it, some people choosing to ignore the fact that I even describe it as a cheesy theme tune in the intro to tell me that it's a cheesy theme tune. But anyway, maybe it is time that I had a change, so maybe I'll take a leaf out of the book of the TV classic The Wire, which had the same theme song throughout but changed the arrangement and genre with every new season. So, are you ready for a hip-hop version? No, neither am I. But perhaps it could do with an update. So any thoughts? Get in touch to let me know. Just Google Joined Up Writing Podcast and drop me a line. And if you haven't done it already, please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whatever your platform of choice is, as it massively helps others to find the show, and it makes it more likely that I'll be able to continue to put out the show, which is now in its 6th year, would you believe? Right, that's it for this week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website, so make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts to have the podcast downloaded automatically every week. Also, remember to get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions or comments, and I'll give you a mention in a future show. Next episode, you'll be hearing my interview with novelist, screenwriter and actor Jonathan Digby. But until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up writing.